We've got a bloated bureaucracy that's only looking after its interests, making more policy to make our lives worse. And the larger it grows, the harder it is to sort of get out of this mess that we're in. I love my country and even my business overseas being affected long-term because of the policy decisions by people who do not pay a price for getting it wrong. But the rest of us will be paying that price.
They're positioning themselves as this green energy powerhouse, but they're flooding all the other countries with the renewables. For themselves, though, they're going hard on coal and nuclear.
It's hard to imagine a more stupid or more dangerous way of making decisions than by putting those decisions in the hands of people who pay no price for being wrong.
What people don't understand is our government loves to throw billions of dollars at problems and go, hey, look at us, we're going to solve whatever.
You're watching the JJ Podcast.
Mike Newman, former New South Wales Senior Trade and Investment Commissioner, thank you so much for coming and joining us today. We have a lot to unpack with you. We're going to be discussing quite a broad range of topics, but I really want to just jump straight into starting with the free trade agreement, because that was signed last week between Australia and the EU. And farmers, they're not happy with the outcome. But I would love for you just to unpack for our listeners what has been agreed to, but also adding in there around the issue with the quotas.
Yeah, look, it's definitely not an FTA that the Austrade claims is the most amazing that's ever been produced. Because if you look at other nations that have signed FTAs with the EU, they are way ahead of us. I mean, let's just take cattle. We're going to 30,600 tonnes per year once this thing is ratified. At the moment, the Mercosur nations will be doing 99,000. So we're 1/3 of that. Sheep, I think we'll have 25,000 tonne per annum once it goes ahead. But the New Zealanders are like 163, 164,000. So which part of this is the most amazing deal that we've ever signed? Because, and look, the very fact that the agricultural sector is already up in arms shows that they clearly have not been listened to, consulted, or had their sort of thoughts heard. This is just the government trying to ram through a deal, which obviously we can get into how the Paris Agreement plays into it. But ultimately, if you look at the numbers, over 80% of the trade today is Europe coming into Australia, and the balance is the other way. So how is this net going to help Australia? I mean, the whole idea of a free trade agreement is hopefully you don't have quotas to deal with. Right?
Yeah.
You just sell.
It kind of eliminates the word free, doesn't it?
Well, it does. But then also, look, I think the National Farmers Federation also raised that European farmers, especially in Germany and France, are online to get 80 billion euros worth of support. So our farmers will be going up and competing against a heavily subsidized European Union. Once again, how is that such a great deal for Australia? Now, cynically, I might say because of the fuel crisis and everything else, this was like the Department of Distraction trying to put something in place.
Something or another headline to take away.
Ultimately, you've got a free trade agreement which Austrade is celebrating, but the customers who it's supposed to support are screaming. So please join the dots on how you could ever get into a position that happened.
Why would they do it? Like, we've already touched on the fact that within this, there's the Paris Agreement, which I do want to go into in a bit of detail if we can, because I think the majority of our listeners would be like, we signed up to the Paris Agreement ages ago. What's new? What do you mean now it's legislated? Like, I think that the mass public probably don't understand what's changed there. But why? Like, what is in Labor's interest in doing this? Like, is it because the agricultural sector and the regional areas aren't voting Labor anyway? So is it a political game for them?
Well, I don't think that's necessarily a direct issue, Jamie, but what I would say is that when you look at the Paris Agreement in and of itself, right, it's trying to hit a target which you are basically via net zero killing your economy along the same way, right? So you're putting up the cost of energy, which feeds through to production costs, refrigeration costs, transport costs, you name it. So if we just take the Paris Agreement as a separate sort of issue, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's actually our government. And when I was the trade commissioner, I often used to say to Japanese and Korean companies, you have to accept the fact that energy policy in Australia is based on religion, not science. You guys do not do that because because you're resource-starved nations, you've got to get energy right. And you cannot have any ripples in that approach, because if you do, Toyota,
Everything crumbles.
Panasonic, and all these
Yeah.
companies cannot produce efficiently and remain market leaders. So governments in Japan and Korea, the same thing, they work hand in glove with industry to say, right, how much energy are you going to need in 20, 30 years? What sort of format, what sort of loads, what sort of this, what sort of that. And then the governments go out
And chase
and work.
it. They ensure they can get that
That's
affordable,
right.
reliable energy.
They'll speak to the oil companies, they'll speak to the gas company, they'll speak to all of the players that can make it happen and support them. But the issue here is that, and it goes back, I mean, the FTA is all part of this. Australia has no statecraft, right? Everything is policy on the fly. I mean, Minns the other day when he said on Sunday, Monday we're having a roundtable to sort of sort out the energy crisis and work out a plan. So basically you're saying you didn't have a plan. Now, you've got 500,000 bureaucrats that work for the New South Wales government. Surely within that there aren't people working on a what-if scenario of how we would act if we had a fuel shortage, et cetera, et cetera. But, going back to the EU FTA and Paris Accord, the Paris Accord, what it will actually mean is that Australian, companies will have to abide by the Paris Accord. So if our, emissions targets keep getting ratcheted lower and lower and lower, they have to meet those targets because the EU can say, you've not hit your targets, we can annul this entire free trade agreement. I mean, why would you sign a free trade agreement that just comes with, a shackle around your leg?
And then we can also then hold the EU to account. But can you see Albo holding them to account to reach their targets
Albo
too?
can't hold his own cabinet to account.
Well, look, I mean, of course, because we're so, religiously just immersed in net zero and saving the planet, even if we turned off everything tomorrow, we wouldn't make an absolute, dot on actually saving the planet. We just continue to wed ourselves to the idea that somehow what we're doing is noble. But the rest of the world has checked out on net zero, right? I mean, the Net Zero Banking Alliance, which was a UN supported venture, all the banks joined on just so they could say, hey, we're part of the Net Zero Banking Alliance, please don't attack us and don't bash us. As soon as Trump got elected, Net Zero Banking Alliance has folded. And it's drill, baby, drill. Record investments are going into fossil fuels. Yet here we are plugging more and more and more money into renewables. And going back to Austrade, Austrade was celebrating that Australia's biggest achievement, in the quest to net zero, was batteries, home batteries. And I'm thinking, so our trade organisation is celebrating taxpayer-funded purchases of imports from a country that treats us as a vassal state. So how is that a success? The Ministry of Commerce in
You
Beijing,
can't even say it without laughing. That's actually it's baffling.
But look, I mean, this is obviously we can touch on the way that the bureaucracy is moving, but Austrade as an organisation also I think needs fundamental reform, because they're out there saying, I mean, their senior people are saying that investors need to use fresh eyes to keep on top of all the changes in our environmental support and legislation. Now, I've always said when I'm in government, the only thing investors look for are two things: predictability and clarity. You give me those two things, then I can reverse engineers to see whether there's a commercial opportunity at stake. But I cannot do it if I have to have fresh eyes and keep looking for, because what does that mean? If I commit now, things might change in 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the line. I mean, this is the sort of I think, very low resolution thinking that's going on. So celebrating the European FTA as some massive achievement, which focuses on First Nations, and women's empowerment, and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate
Let
on
Jamie
that?
get into
Before
that,
we move
exactly.
on to bureaucracy, there was one element too that free trade agreement where the government was very quick to highlight that they've got a commitment to environment, which we've obviously touched on, in climate change, but gender equality, women's economic empowerment, workers' rights and standards, but also First Nations provisions are also a focus. How can that be balanced within a free trade agreement? Like, why include things like that?
Well, first, it's completely irrelevant. Trade should be just about maximising outcomes for Australia, for exporters, whether they are First Nations. Well, I don't like using the First Nations because it's not really a term for us. Aboriginal, Torres Strait Island business. If they have great companies and can thrive in Europe, great. But do we have to compartmentalise into identities in terms of, are we going to have Indigenous only supported, trade missions? Are we going to have, because ultimately it's the customer in Europe that decides whether they want to buy a specific product. Are they going, wow, that's an Indigenous product, I should buy that. Or this is women-only business, I should buy that. Now, I'm sure there's a part of society that might want to do that in Europe, but ultimately, if you want to run good trade policy, all this sort of stuff is only to appeal to the internal virtue signaling set.
Yeah.
Right. And I'll give you a perfect example. When the First Nations Clean Energy Strategy 2024 to 2030 was released, all the apparatchiks in the climate space were celebrating this document as world leading, all of the buzzwords and the platitudes, right? Now, here's where it gets important. I actually read the thing from cover to cover. So I'm probably the only one.
I was going to say, I don't know how many other people would have done that,
but I wanted to understand, what was so great about it. It didn't mention how much energy, in what format, by when, where, and how much it was going to cost was in that document. Not any of it. There was no reference to that. You've got a 6-year plan. And the biggest irony of the document, which is classic, is that there was kind of a whole section on feedback. And a lot of the Indigenous people who were on these programs says, we don't want to speak to the departments because all they do is dilute the message. We want to speak to the minister only because these programs are completely rubbish. It's in their chapter and verse. This is why, our Australian government departments are so infused with this woke virtue signaling nonsense, which has absolutely zero impact on real economic outcomes for the country. And that's why the government sticks it in the FTA saying, look at us, this is the most progressive trade deal ever. I don't know who they're trying to appeal to other than the internal collective.
And I'd love to know how many millions were spent on that report that you read with no KPIs or outcomes or targets to be able to show whether it was successful or not. Just another...
But we can feel good about it.
Yes, exactly. This is what I found so interesting with Trump and Elon Musk, right? Not that I'm suggesting, or I don't know, maybe we do need a Trump and Elon Musk, who knows? But what I will say is that when they came out with this whole Doge thing and they were able to actually list DEI and woke policies that were infiltrated throughout government and put dollar amounts to it, X million on this or X hundreds of millions or billion, man, I'd love to see it in our budgets.
Yeah, well, I mean, I did a sort of a dummy run when I was at government. My department loved that sort of stuff too. We had, during NIDOC week, my God, it's just a whole woke fest of yarning circles. We even put on our website that we were doing Aboriginal basket weaving or woodworking or something like that. And the thing is that and when they do these things online, 500-600 bureaucrats jump on it. Now, whether they're paying attention or whatever, who knows? But if this goes for 4 hours,
the productivity,
4 times 500 bureaucrats, so 2,000, hours times
their
whatever salary they're on, you're thinking hundreds of thousands of dollars are just going down the toilet. Now, I always say that if the senior bureaucrats in all these departments are so, beholden to wanting to do this, why don't you really show your conviction by doing it on your own time as a sign that there's no stronger heart than the one of a volunteer? But no, it's all done on the taxpayer dime. And the funny thing is, when you read the staff, they have these annual surveys, right? And they break it down by, Indigenous groups and people who identify as LGBT or trans or whatever. It's all broken down. So the irony was, when you look at the overall marks they give to senior executives in a positive ranking, those groups ranked senior executives the lowest, which probably means that the very people they're trying to appeal to can see through all of the, the smoke and mirrors to say that all you're doing this is for your own personal profiling. And they love it. And it's all, and the thing is, they put it on their website. That's why they put it in here, this, EU FTA. Just
ticking their boxes and patting ourselves on the back.
It's like a chorus of clapping seals. That's the kind of thing that we're dealing with.
Brilliant.
Well, let's continue on with the bureaucracy, because there's some wild statistics that comes out of our public service. And I know that, there are certainly aspects of the public service that are so crucial to our state and country. The police force and nurses are so crucial.
Teachers and
good
firemen.
public servants, they're worth their weight in gold. So the issue is certainly not around certain aspects of this. But Australia has a big problem. And it was around here that we have the most bloated bureaucracy per capita in the world, with our public sector costing $232 billion a year. And I guess you put it into comparison to a country like Japan, and I know that you work closely with Japan and you have for 40 years, but we have 140 public servants to every 1,000 people. Japan has 38 public servants to every 1,000 people. And so it just really shows how heavy we are in that private sector. But ultimately, I've heard you previously refer to this as self-sabotage.
Yeah.
Just talk us through this.
Okay, so, I mean, the number's actually blown out to 250 now.
Jeez.
Whoa, 250 per 1,000?
250 billion.
Billion.
Oh, $250 billion.
Yeah.
Wow.
But that's even worse.
Either way, I'm shocked.
$250 billion a year,
it's a
though, for a
jaw-dropping
country
moment.
that's...
Across federal, state and local.
Yeah.
But, I mean, now since COVID, the federal public service have gone from like 23, 24 billion to 42 or 41.
Yeah.
42, I mean, it's counting.
It's an increased 54%, and on a state level, an increase of about 20%. They've all had pay rises.
Yeah, I mean, they're all baked in, although the ABC is upset that they can only, they're not prepared to take 10% over 3 years with $1,000 bonus. I mean, go on a subscription.
Poor
really, guys.
ABC.
Honestly, they should go on a subscription.
They really
model.
should. They're $1.2 billion a year that the taxpayer funds for that broadcast. SBS took a similar deal. The staff took a similar deal to what was offered to the ABC. And apparently their ratings went through the roof when the ABC staff all walked off the job. As in, the ratings went up through the roof of SBS. So people flicked off the ABC and went over to watch SBS.
But to go back to the self-sabotage question, right? So Japan is a country that's probably 4.5 times our population. They run on a bureaucracy that's only 30% larger. Now, Japan is a very paper-centric country, filling lots of paper forms and whatnot, right? But their bureaucrats are also not paid that much. Their most senior bureaucrats would be on 250,000 Aussie a year.
And just compare that to what ours would be on.
Our federal,
$500,000.
No.
930 to a mil.
Oh, they're department heads.
But it doesn't matter.
So
You're
not
comparing the
politicians.
two.
No.
Yeah,
So the actual department heads in Japanese departments, that's what they're getting paid.
Yeah, right.
But when I talk about self-sabotage, is that, these organisms, and I call them organisms, they become self-serving collectives, right? And what people out there need to understand is that, there are some fantastic bureaucrats. I've worked with them, and I've got the great story of this guy. I won't say his name, but during COVID, he did some fantastic work for one of my Korean clients. I never met him. I thought, wow, this is brilliant. I mean, I just took it as I saw it, and I wrote back and said, this is some of the most fantastic work. Can't wait to meet you after COVID. And I met him. I was, mate, you should be like, running a department by now with work like that. And he said, Mike, I haven't been promoted for 17 years. 17 years. Now, he was from a Southeast Asian nation. So probably, 150 grand to him was probably just gold dust.
Yeah,
my God, look, I mean, putting that to one side, brilliant employee. But what happens is that the people in government, political reliability is put ahead of capability every
day.
Time. They want people who are yes men, yes women, to just toe the line. And take New South Wales as a perfect example. The GSC Act, part of the GSC Act allows senior executives to be fired for no reason whatsoever on the payment of 38-week salary. So if you're getting maybe 2-3 times what you may be able to get in the private sector, you just sharpen toe the line, because the downside of you challenging the system is that probably you're going to be blackballed for life. if you do that.
Yeah.
And they just want to hire people who, and that's why you get all of this sort of stuff like the First Nations and the women's empowerment and all that rubbish inside the free trade agreement. Those things don't do anything to help. But what it does is it brings that kumbaya factor inside the government. They spend so much time, again, doing Ida Hobbit Day, International Women's Week, NIDOC Week, and we end up not doing any of these things. So why I say it ends up being self-sabotage is that when you could keep growing the public service, you've got to give them stuff to do. So what do they come up with? More regulation, higher taxes,
more red tape,
restrictions,
exactly, more certification.
So why do we have 47,000 insolvencies since Albanese took office? Why is the government now, the biggest employer of new hires?
8 out of 10 new jobs.
Yeah, and
public sector. So
all that's telling you is, it's like a world wrestling match, and basically the private sector's tapping out. We just can't bear this. And whether it's energy prices, whether it's all of these things play a role, but over-regulation. Take Victoria as a perfect example. To open a cafe, you need 36 licenses.
Which is unbelievable.
Well, there was a thing said the other day that a third of people, a poll was done, and a third of people are considering leaving the state, a third of small businesses considering shutting down. I mean, you think Victoria's bad now.
Yeah. Well, but look, I mean, that state is technically bust. And this then goes back to GST redistribution, right? Victoria used to net pay in because, one of the largest states where you have more business activity. Now it's a net recipient. It's like now they're a mendicant state and they're being rewarded for failure. I mean, look at all the blowouts, suburban rail loop and all the other, God knows what else that, Jacinda Allen is sitting on. But they simply do not know how to run a budget or a government without going to all these other areas, the smoke and mirror show and, the big build. Well, let's not investigate where $15 billion might have got missing. It's just shut that down.
In your mind, what do you think should be a payment structure for the public sector? Because, in the private sector, if you're not hitting targets or you're not doing well in your job, you lose that job.
Correct.
Like if you're having blowouts of, take the bomb website, for example. Yeah. It blows my mind that it's a $100 million website that nowhere along the way someone has stopped and said, ooh, even at 10 million, you're like, ooh, we're getting a little bit out of, 20 million. But no one was held to account. It was then just never spoken about ever again. No one is
you
ever
saw a few reels on social media and then that's the end of it.
But that's it. No one ever is then lost their job or had pay docked or something happen like what you would see in the private sector. What do you think they need to be doing to structure salaries or payment?
I'll just go down like a lead balloon inside there, but I would say you have to go back to a remuneration structure where if you're on $1 million, that now is $500,000, right? And you can get the balance provided you hit. So if you're going to say you're going to build 10,000 houses a year, if you don't hit 10,000 houses a year, you don't get paid.
Bring KPIs into the public sector.
Proper KPIs, because the thing is that I've seen how the numbers get manipulated in the background to get an outcome by pretending that something happened when it really didn't, or just changing the kind of the way that it's reported, such that you create something that doesn't exist, but then you bury it in a restructuring. Right? They have a thing called a MOG, which means machinery of government.
Yeah.
And the National Audit Office in 2016 did a study across 200 MOGs inside the federal government. So, over 20 years, so 10 a year. They found that the average time to complete the MOG was between 203 and 371 days at an average cost of $15 million back then. So if you think 200 MOGs times $15 million average, that's $3 billion gone up in smoke on, I guess, changing websites and reshuffling org charts and, doing all the, the letterhead and whatnot. But it's simply, once again, the government, there is no accountability amongst the bureaucracy. And people out there need to understand. And that's, I was certainly more than happy to be judged by KPIs and the outcomes, because that's what drives me. But for them, it's, it's extraneous factors. I mean, if they're always putting the blame on something else, or just ignoring it. I mean, you look at question time. Well, not question time. Sorry, Senate estimates where bureaucrats say, "I'll just have to take that on us.
Yes.
Take it on us.
Yeah.
Take it on us." If you were a CEO in a public company
And you
and you
took it
said
on
to your
notice.
shareholders and said, "Oh, don't
Yeah.
take that on notice,"
You'd be showing the door.
you're gone. And I mean, you might say to your CFO, well, Jamie, my CFO, might be able to give me a better read on, that question you're asking. Now, if I'm a shareholder, I might not like the answer I get, but at least I'll get one.
Yeah.
So-
Jamie and I spoke about this very thing in the car on the way here this morning because you just touched on something really interesting, and that's to do with messaging, government messaging, and the way they report something or sell their narrative. And Jamie and I were saying this with regards to we've found 114 billion in savings. So the Labor government have said that in Senate estimates and been reporting that a
Katie
bit.
Gallagher.
They ended up spending more than that, so there's actually no savings at all. But the narrative is we found 114 billion in savings. I want to mention this quote that I love from economist Thomas Sowell that touches on this very thing we're describing, he says, it's hard to imagine a more stupid or more dangerous way of making decisions than by putting those decisions in the hands of people who pay no price for being wrong. Now, I read this quote to a girlfriend of mine yesterday. We were having lunch, and she mentioned something about in medieval times or Roman times or something, when they had politicians or a board of directors rather, people who volunteered for the job didn't get it because it actually showed that their motives were wrong for wanting to do it. It was power or ego. So they went out and found people that weren't volunteering for it to get the right brains and right passion for it. So I think it's all got to be flipped on its head.
Yeah, well, hopefully. But I mean, just to touch on one other area where the public service, especially at senior executive levels, should be restructured. If you're going to get paid $1 million a year, I think one of the requirements, because let's face it, at the moment at a federal level, the average tenure inside the public service for the people at the top is 28 years. So they're all seasoned career bureaucrats. Maybe there should be a clause in there saying that, well, maybe you have to have a minimum 15 years of experience in the private sector of the very industry sector, whatever that you are going to cover, before you even qualify for that position.
But Mike, what would that do to all our 21-year-old senators?
Well, I'd fall over signs and
But it is a valid point though, because I look at people like Katie Gallagher and Jim Chalmers who are responsible for our economy, and neither of them have any form of experience. Neither of them are economists, and that concerns me. I'm sure they're getting very good help outside of it, but I would feel a lot more comfortable with people running our economy who have either come from the business sector or had studied or had some sort of experience in that area versus just being handed these portfolios.
Well, Jamie, the funny thing is the government does actually invite business experts into these forums, but they just never listen.
They don't listen.
And I've spoken to a lot of these senior execs outside of these meetings. We've told them this is what you got to do, and they don't listen to us. And then woe betide, we're back to where we were before because you've not listened how rational business economics goes. And look, if you think about it logically, more bureaucrats, more legislation, more regulation, more. You just strangle business tighter and tighter and tighter, and that's why business confidence is going through the floor. Is because people think, well, I've got to set up 36 licenses to set up a cafe in Victoria. Okay, food hygiene, fire safety, and hygiene, get all of that. Why do I need to have a contract with Vic Roads or I have a cafe inside of a shopping mall? But these are all the things whereby. And then I had lunch in a Japanese restaurant, which I often go to when I'm in Sydney, and he said that for me to set up this restaurant, I have to spend $20,000 in external fees, paying for people to get me the paperwork. That's just ridiculous.
On that, let's just stay with this for a moment. I heard you recently say that in your 40 years of dealing with Japan, for the first time ever, they have now referred to us as a political risk. And is that due to, one, the policies that are being implemented here, or to your point of what you were just saying, like all of the red tape and the licenses and what we were saying earlier about how, we're going to keep changing the landscape and it just makes us a risk to come and invest in?
Yeah, well, I mean, several things. First, the Japanese and the Koreans, they pay lip service to net zero and all these sorts of things. It's not saying they don't want to be cleaner or responsible citizens. That's not the point. But for countries that have zero resources at home, no gas, no coal, no things like that, that is basically because, they have the statecraft which looks forward, and they need to deal with countries that can guarantee them supply in 30, 40 years' time without too much fuss, right? We want to lock in what we don't have to make sure we have supplies, like we had now with the fuel supplies. They got 250 days because the Middle East skirmishes are not their first rodeo, so they know what's going on. So we bastardized the coal industry, which they totally rely on. And New South Wales, 70% of the exports to Japan from New South Wales is coal. And now the New South Wales government is saying, we're going to stop coal, future coal mines. And I think,
what a brilliant economic decision.
Guys, this is the sort of thing where predictability and clarity that's not the predictability they're looking for. Yeah, you're not going to be able to do any coal, go away. I mean, that's not what you do with long-term partners and I think the numbers, people need to understand that Korea and Japan combined over the last 50 years have imported from Australia 1.5 trillion with a T dollars of coal and gas and things like that. Great trading partners. They don't whinge and complain and moan, or at least not until recently. Whereas, our friends in the Middle Kingdom are only too happy to slap tariffs on us when we call for an independent investigation on the Wuhan virus. But going to what you were saying there, Jamie, it is true that inside the halls of some of Japan's ministries, they're saying that we are starting to grow an allergy towards investing in Australia because you just keep putting more and more roadblocks in the way. Many cases you don't consult with us. And it was a great case when Palaszczuk jacked up coal royalties without consulting Japanese. And at the time, then Ambassador Yamagami went thermonuclear in the media saying that you are not great mates for doing this, and you erode that trust. It's kind of, even when I spoke to a lot of corporates in that sort of energy space in Japan and Korea, and it's like, God, you guys used to be so reliable, but now like we're just kind of like, yeah, you too, you're thinking this, and that's how this is playing out. So, and then the Japanese ambassador currently, Mr. Suzuki, he was in the paper saying that, look, if you help us out on LNG, we'll help you with some of our fuel supplies to, as a quid pro quo. Now, at one level, what people need to understand is this is not the Japanese sort of pleading for help. It's just to say, we're at DEFCON 2, guys, with the relationship. We've been trying our hardest to work together in a positive way because we've now got the 50th anniversary of the Nara Treaty, which was the kind of start of trade between us. But our government is so oblivious to what's going on. And I've met with our trade missions overseas and I said, this is what I'm hearing from the market. Oh, we've not heard. I said, yeah, because you never put yourself in a position, because often companies feel afraid to truly express their expressions in front of government for fear they might get punished in some way, shape or form. But I take it a step further, because when I was the New South Wales Commissioner, whenever companies came into our office or I went to their office, I used to say that I'm not letting you go until you tell me something bad about my state, because I can't fix what I don't know. And if you tell me what I think is bad with our state, then we can work together to fix it. Because unless you have that cathartic conversation, and then I'm like, oh, fuck. You don't sound like you're from government. I said, well, I was in investment bank for 25 years. And if I don't help my customer find a solution, then I'm never going to get your business. So we use that same approach, and they would be so much forthcoming and say, yeah, we want to do this. Yeah, your taxes here, and going through all of the red, green, and black tape. It just makes life miserable for us to go through these processes. Not that we don't want to be abiding by them, but you guys got to understand there are so many global jurisdictions who are so helpful to wanting to land our business. And I'm saying that it's not this kind of kumbaya sort of, we need to have a trade policy and a framework where we're sort of saying, what Australia does is try to find customers for our products rather than find products for our customers. Right? what do you want to do in my country? And I'll see
Yeah.
if I can find it for you.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That was
exactly.
always our approach. We would go, you want coal? Okay, we've got massive coal reserves.
We've got masses of everything.
Yeah,
That's the frustration.
And look, that's what they don't understand. It's like, you've got everything. We would kill to have what you have. And I often ask them this question because it's kind of a sort of an in-joke with the Japanese Korean business community. So I said, if you woke up tomorrow in Sydney and it was actually Tokyo or Seoul, and you open up the paper and you found that you had so much access to all of this coal, gas,
Rare
uranium,
minerals, yeah.
well, all of it, would you build a 100% renewables grid? No way. We would do what we do in Japan and make energy even cheaper because we've got all of we've got all of these materials, we've got all the technology to efficiently process it or combust it to make cheap, reliable energy and so on. That's what they would do. But for us, it's stay away. We're trying to wean you off coal. We're trying to guilt trip you into sort of doing these things. But ultimately, Japan has a responsibility to its own citizens to make sure they have cheap, affordable power for their industry to thrive. That's the bottom line. So trying to sort of make us, go through hoops and hurdles to get. And I've been very proactive with many Japanese companies and their government saying, guys, you need to raise your voices, right? You think that, because originally when the senior executive, JERA, was one of their big energy companies, they went to some conference in Perth and said, if you guys don't fix your regulatory framework by 2030, we're out of here. And, the government here, the Japanese government here in Sydney were like, oh my God, we're so worried. I said, do it and do it again and again and again and send the message that we are no longer going to tolerate the normal, polite Japanese, which is a wonderful thing in itself.
What about the message here in Australia, though? Like with what you're saying, right, we've just touched on the impact of the European Free Trade Agreement, the risk portfolio of Australia now in terms of foreign partners wanting to trade with us. But what about here in Australia? Like forget international for a sec. We just saw in the papers this week, massive developers such as, is it Harry Triguboff? I don't know if I said his surname correctly, head of Meriton. And he's on the papers this week saying he's stopped acquiring land, that the construction and builders are fleeing the state of New South Wales. We have a housing shortage. And here in Australia, we can't get in our own investment right from our own constructors and developers and builders to build houses, because of all the red tape and legislation.
It all plays to the same thing, right? It's kind of funny. We need to move on a massive deregulation diet, right?
Yeah.
Allow companies to compete. Why are we paying so much for everything? I mean, we know that the cost of building a house in New South Wales, half of it is in taxes and whatnot. And because the thing is that governments cannot think beyond taxing more. They can't think of, how can I spend my money better? And I'll give you a perfect example of the way trade works. Because if you look at, so the Fraser's Research Institute in critical minerals, right? Well, they're in mining. So every year, 2,200 CEOs they speak to around the world, asking which jurisdictions have the best investment attractiveness and policy perceptions index, all those sorts of things. There is no Australian state in the top 10 anymore.
Yeah.
Right? We've all fallen out.
Jamie had made a note of that.
Yeah, right. We've all fallen out of that. But where I want to take this is that New South Wales, when I was the commissioner, I spoke to the relevant team saying, companies are really getting frustrated our confusing regulatory framework, which don't really set in positive signals of intent. We were 20th then. We're now 62nd. We are behind Zimbabwe, the Ivory Coast, and the DR Congo. Now, not to disparage African nations, everyone out there should surely think, how can we be less attractive as an investment destination than places who have slightly, troubling kind of political systems? But it goes back to the regulation. If you've got too much regulation and drive it away. So if you look at Alaska and places like Utah, when questions are asked in that survey to say, how quickly can the government turn around like approvals? Less than 2 months. For us, years and years and years and years. And here's the difference, because what people don't understand is our government loves to throw billions of dollars at problems and go, hey, look at us, we're going to solve whatever. And if you cut development times, or at least approval times, from 5 to 7 years to 6 months.
Mm.
That could be worth $500 million to a corporation in actual intrinsic value. So we can say, hey, Jamie, I'm going to give you nothing, but I'm going to cut your time in 5 years. What do you say? Done.
Yeah.
Right? Because I get $500 million of value. We win because jobs start earlier. all the benefits of why you do trade start earlier. And here's the irony, right? We, especially in the renewable energy sector, everything is delayed. Everything's blowing up because we didn't have a plan to begin with. It's the standard path for the course. But we've turning off our coal-fired power on the hope that the renewables would have arrived by then. It's like, oh, gee, that didn't work. And then we keep extending coal and extend. It goes back to, we have to deregulate and have a system whereby we do direct dealing with companies and countries. And this is where I'm worried about the FTA, because the EU FTA rather, is because if you speak to a company and say, okay, we'll give you a 4-year, 5-year window to get to a certain emissions level, as opposed to having to meet it on day one, because getting to places costs money, and you have to have a commercial pathway to get there. But our governments do not put us in a position whereby that can ever happen, and that's why we have such a convoluted system, which is just total failure. And then all of the things that are leading into that are caused by doubling down on things that are not working.
There's two things I still want to cover with you before we wrap up. But just going back to Japan and around their development of nuclear, I know that there's two electric companies over in Japan that are sort of the utilities sector. And they're looking at building new nuclear infrastructure. And it's off the back of the rise in the AI boom. And I saw that, and then just recently, Tim Ayres made that announcement that if AI data centers were to be built here, they had to then agree to having renewables built around them to be able to power it. And I looked at that and I thought, if you were companies, would you be going down the Japanese path where they're exploring nuclear and other countries around the world, or would you put your hand up to come and build an AI data center here in Australia, and you have to then be signed on to the renewable option? I just think it makes us seem like such an uninteresting, difficult place to be. But just tell us about what these Japanese countries, why the decision of what they're doing with the nuclear.
Okay, well, first of all, Jamie, why is the government telling companies how they should power their AI
Correct.
centers? That's their shtick. Surely they know better what's the best way to power a data center, but put that to one side. The Japanese, so Kyushu and Kansai Electric, two of the big gencos, they're looking at introducing new nuclear. It's not officially enshrined yet, but they're pushing that way. Because the Japanese are going, all right, yes, we had Fukushima, but we know that if we're going to get reliable emissions-free energy and reliable baseload, we need nuclear. And they're opening new nuclear plants. So Kashiwazaki Kariwa, it's a mouthful, it's the world's biggest nuclear reactor. It's 8.2 gigawatts, I think. They're getting that back up and running. Now, after Fukushima, the Japanese government went through the most intense dotting of I's,
regulation,
to make sure that this would never, ever happen again. And I think it's just worth touching on Fukushima, because a lot of people don't really understand what happened. 6 months before the earthquake and the implosion, TEPCO, the operator, thought, should we move the diesel gen sets from under the reactor to higher ground, or should we raise the seawall to 2 meters? Now, they thought, well, perhaps it's more sensible, given we're going to decommission this plant in a year's time, obviously not knowing the quake was coming, that by the time we start doing all this stuff and putting orders for, it's not like you go to Bunnings in Japan and gen sets, it's a massive bits of kit. So they have a 9-month lead time. Building a concrete wall might take 9 months or whatever. So by the time you've done all this stuff, you're decommissioning. So they chose not to do it. So when the earthquake hit, and I was there at the time, not in Fukushima, but in Tokyo, but the reactor acted absolutely, did spec. 40-year-old reactor, instant scram, coal shutdown. generators start firing up, water pumps start cooling the reactor. It was only when the wave, which ended up being 2 meters higher and flooded the generator room, that the power stopped, and then the pump stopped, and then the reactor didn't cool, and then you had a hydrogen explosion. Anyway, the rest is history. But that was the actual reactor itself performed flawlessly without damage. Now, they're trying to redevelop Fukushima. There's another tale in Japan. Tohoku Electric has an Onagawa nuclear power plant, which was close to the epicenter of the quake, faced with a bigger wave, bigger shock, everything else. Nothing happened to it. Not a thing other than maybe a few cracks in fibro walls. The people who lived in the seaside town of Onagawa, many of them fled to the reactor knowing it was the safest place to be. So that kind of changed the narrative. But to go back to what you were saying about the actual, Japanese building for AI and whatnot, and energy more broadly, is that in order to have efficient AI, you need efficient, cheap energy. And it's the same for the Koreans. They're doing the same thing, building more nuclear. We could have nuclear here, and we should have nuclear here. And if Mr. Bowman is absolutely convinced, because he has so much more intellectually superior data, lift the ban, mate, and let the nuclear lobby die on that hill, because he knows it won't. And I know, I've spoken to Japanese corporates and Korean corporates who are prepared to give us money for, or at least invest in the project, take the first 20 years and take losses, provided they make the money on the back end, right? Because for them, and if you look at the Korean, Korea has what's called the Korea Power Exchange, where all of the energy prices are listed wholesale. Nuclear, cheapest by far for the 20 years of data they've got there, 5 cents a kilowatt hour. What are we, 35?
Yeah.
Not comparable.
No.
It's crazy.
And then people talk about how expensive nuclear power plants are to build. And that's just also false as well. Depends on who you get to build it.
Yes.
We were also talking about this with Will Shackle, because a lot of other people say that they think you can't get a nuclear power plant up and running for 20 or 30 years. And he was like, 6 to 8 years. So there's just so much misinformation about
there
it.
is. And I took a delegation to Korea in January 2025 and went saw the entire nuclear supply chain in Korea. Korea has been building nuclear reactors for 50 years non-stop. 50 years non-stop. Same team. So it's like the All Blacks in their home. So all over the bat, there was somebody to catch or score a try. So that's why it works so effectively, because they know how to do it. No one crosses lines. And they often love to refer to the, nuclear power plant in Europe. That was, because they picked multinational partners, and then I think one of the Chinese partners did a runner, and then someone was left with a $10 billion deal. That would never happen in Korea. So when they built the Baraka nuclear power plant in the UAE, first concrete poured, first electron coming out, 5 years. So it wasn't 10, 15, 20 that the nuclear lobby hates. Well, let's face it, it's the renewables carpetbaggers that are so afraid that nuclear will steal their lunch, and let's face it, the level of the low resolution politicians that we have, the first thing is to jump to Simpsons memes, 3
the 3
Yes,
right?
far out.
That's how intelligent we look to the rest of the world.
I just wanted to get your thoughts on something, which I actually wanted to ask you when you were on my show the other night.
Yeah.
I recently read an article in the New York Post, and it was fascinating because it was arguing about how China are pushing themselves out there as this whole big green energy powerhouse. They're dominating that global market. They're pushing out the wind turbines and the solar panels and the batteries, and they're shipping it all out to all the Western countries. A lot are coming here. But at the same time, though, they are opening a coal-fired power station every week. They're investing quite heavily in nuclear. I know that they are building that thorium reactor, which will be the first one, I believe, in the world at the time when it's finished. So this article is basically saying that they're positioning themselves as this green energy powerhouse, but they're flooding all the other countries with the renewables. But for themselves, though, they're going hard on coal and nuclear. And I wanted to get your thoughts on that, because I found it really interesting as I was reading it. And I thought, send all of the renewables to every other country so that their energy prices go through the roof. But for yourself,
they get
going
the
low.
manufacturing of it too.
Well, I mean, as I said, I've got full marks of the Chinese Communist Party to be able to dupe gullible nations like us to fall for this sort of stuff. I mean, there's a couple of things. The Chinese built a dedicated 1,814 kilometre railway track just to transport coal from the port to the inland places, right? Coal isn't going away. Another thing that many people may not be aware of, last year, the 3 largest solar manufacturers combined lost $60 billion because of the massive oversupply. So that's why I was, solar panels are so cheap. They're getting cheaper and cheaper. And well, that's because there's just so much oversupply that they can't get rid of the things. But the problem is everyone thinks, solar panels, they're so cheap. Yeah, but it's all the infrastructure on the, the transmission that costs everything. And that's
Not to mention all the fossil fuels required to create them. Like, let's not talk about
details. But that's the thing, right? And you're right. China has been very, very sensible in making us sort of guilt trip us into doing these sorts of things. Yes, they're building more coal-fired power. Yes, they're doing this. Yes, they're doing that. But look, maybe the lesson to take away from China is that China is looking after China's interests. I mean, what a novel concept. But we're trying to save the planet for the rest of the world while we're sort of like the last nation on earth. That it's almost like that Japanese soldier from World War II that was found on a deserted island 30 years after the war had finished, right? We're sort of still fighting this kind of ideological battle that actually won't do anything. So I really do think that this is why, to sum all of the conversation up, that Australia has to wake up. We lose a coal or a gas deal with the Japanese, that's gone for 30 years. It's not coming back. That's not, sorry, we made a mistake, we admit it, can we go back to the way things used to be? And it's like, well, because I know that the Japanese are also saying, we're looking at Vietnam now for coal because, Minzy's just given us another reason why we need to go to it, because why would we waste all this time trying to fight against stuff that you won't sell us? You have the highest calorific coal, the best stuff to use, where you won't be able to use it.
Yeah.
And that's, how we have put ourselves into a position whereby we've let ideology totally overrule any common sense. And it's through the entire supply chain, if you want to call that, of the way that government works. And I would even argue that we have too many ministers who will not push back on their departments and say, that doesn't sound right. They just go with the flow. All they do is parrot departmental talking points and make out like somehow that's gospel. And that's why I think, we've seen a huge sea change in the way that our political structure is starting to change, whether in South Australia election, One Nation, a huge surge, because
they're going for an Australia first narrative. That's what it is.
You've got people that just sound authentic. It's like, okay, well, 2 years ago you were this way and now you're that way. Well, what am I to think in 2 years you might be thinking something else? Yeah. Again, goes back to predictability. At least, love or loathe One Nation, I think their rise will probably continue ongoing. And it's because the average Aussie out there who is struggling, and I always say there is nothing worse than telling voters they're living a life they're not experiencing.
Yeah.
Right?
That gaslighting thing you talk about.
And I think they're just sick of it. And that's why the more and more they hear authenticity, they go, I'm voting for that.
Can I just ask one last thing? I think Jamie's ready to wrap up, but I really love what you said about Australia needs to go on a deregulation diet. I think I'm going to steal that phrase. What I do want to ask you, though, is you've already mentioned in terms of risk, there are countries now like Zimbabwe and the Congo and African nations where suddenly it's more attractive to do business there than it is in Australia. And you said Australia needs to wake up. Hopefully it is, as you say, with like a surge politically of what we're seeing. But what does Australia look like, Mike, in 10, 20, 30 years if we were to continue voting in this Labor socialist government and we were to continue on this high red tape, high regulation, unattractive investment? Do we become third world?
Well, I mean, in a sense, we become Argentina. Well, actually, that's a slight on Argentina because Argentina's going great guns. Of course, they deregulate and do everything else.
And what they do, they flipped government.
But
exactly.
We are going to find ourselves a backwater, and the sort of the Banana Republic jokes come out because this is, our governments talk without shame about being less fortunate and all this kind of stuff because everything is just, we're the good guys. You should work and deal with us because we're good guys. No, because I'm a business, and if you don't make life easy for me, I just go to where somewhere is. And there are so many countries out there throwing huge incentives to set up, because they know if you set up a coal line or a factory, that's there for 20, 30 years minimum, and all the jobs, the cafes, the dry cleaners, the supermarkets have kind of flocked to that, is what it is. But I do think we are going down, a socialist hellhole, because we have a government that is so out of touch. And I'll close on energy, because in 2021, we had 186,000 people living in energy poverty, meaning they couldn't pay their bills. That number is now 337. So all this crap about 275 by 2025. And let's not forget, all we're hearing from the main political parties is trust us because we have experience and we've been doing this for decades and we know how to run a budget and we know how to do this and we know how to do that. Hang on. 337,000 people, households in Australia cannot pay their electricity bills, and they have to go on these kind of payment plans, of which 40% is still on them. So they're in this perpetual cycle they can't escape. And we've got politicians out there who do not know how to fix these problems. The only thing they know is to tax more, find another way. How do we tax superannuation? You've saved all your life. How, the government saying, well, I'm not responsible for your poor life choices of saving for your retirement. I'm going to tax it and squeeze you and whatnot. So, we really, really need, and I think the Australian voters are telling us that. No more. We don't want to have this never-ending stream of platitudes and talking out by both sides of your mouth. And Albo did a post saying, we're going to stop fuel price gouging. We're doubling the fines. And it's like, well, and you read the comments, I cannot begin to, they're not fit for publication. There's so many expletives like F you, blah, 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 because we don't buy this bullshit anymore. That's why he's being booed at Bondi, booed at the Australian Open, the
heckled in the mosque.
He's even heckled. Yeah, exactly.
But he has created this for himself. And therefore I have no sympathy with that. But I think the voters now have no sympathy. Therefore, if this Labor government is not turfed, Australia is headed to the Argentina that was, because we've got a bloated bureaucracy that's only looking after its interests, making more policy to make our lives worse. And the larger it grows, the harder it is to sort of get out of this mess that we're in. I love my country, and, even my business overseas is being affected long-term because of the policy decisions by people who do not pay a price for getting it wrong. But the rest of us will be paying that price.
I think those last couple of sentences will have to be the trailer. Turf the Labor government. That'll be the name of the episode.
Mike, thank you so much.
Thanks,
It was very
Jamie,
insightful.
Jamie.
We appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for listening to the JJ Podcast.